Imagine a world where God isn't, a distant creator or some kind of cosmic person with feelings and plans, but is actually the very substance of reality itself, the universe. And imagine your deepest feelings, joy, sorrow, whatever, are governed by natural laws, just as predictable, as necessary as gravity.
Right, like physics for emotions.
Exactly. And where true freedom, human freedom, isn't about doing whatever you want, arbitrary choice, but it comes from understanding the absolute necessity of everything that happens.
It's a radical shift in perspective.
It really is. Welcome, everyone, to a deep dive into the universe of Baruch Spinoza's ethics.
Quite a universe it is.
Okay, let's try to unpack this. It's a profound work, incredibly challenging. Today, we're diving deep into one of the real cornerstones of Western philosophy, Spinoza's ethics, proved in geometrical order.
Yeah, and Spinoza himself, well, he was controversial, to say the least.
Mildly put, yeah. Excommunicated from his own community, his books banned, his name became almost shorthand for heresy and atheism to many people.
Absolutely. But despite all that, his systematic approach, that unyielding commitment to reason and this integrated vision he had, seeing reality, God, mind, emotions, freedom, all as one coherent system, it's made the ethics monumentally influential. Still resonates today, even with modern science in some ways.
It really does.
And the ethics it stands apart, doesn't it? Spinoza's ambition was huge. He wanted to build a complete philosophical system with the same kind of certainty, the same clarity, the same logical necessity you find in, say, Euclidean geometry.
He doesn't just offer ideas, does he? He sets out to prove them, step by logical step.
Axiom by axiom. Definition by definition.
So to help us navigate this intricate masterpiece, we've pulled together a range of sources. We've got key excerpts from the ethics itself, different translations. We've got scholarly analyses, introductions that frame the whole project.
Biographical details, too, which really help understand the context he was thinking in. And we're looking at connections to his other major work, the Theological Political Treatise, which is crucial as well.
Right. So our mission here for this deep dive is to guide you through this philosophical edifice, part by part, following the logical structure that Spinoza so painstakingly built.
We want to pull out the most important nuggets, the key insights, the foundational arguments, give you a shortcut maybe to being really well-informed about this demanding but honestly incredibly rewarding worldview.
So yeah, settle in. It's an intellectual journey. We're going to try and, with Spinoza, follow his chain of reasoning, even when it leads to conclusions that seem to overturn everything we think we know.
It definitely requires patience and a willingness to see the world through a radically different lens.
Ready to jump in.
Let's do it. And I think we have to start where Spinoza starts, with the method itself. What makes the ethics, just looking at it, so striking?
Yeah, when you first open it up, especially an edition that keeps the original layout, it looks nothing like a normal philosophy book. It looks like, a geometry textbook. It's organized more geometrico in the manner of geometry.
Precisely. He starts with definitions, def 1, def 2, and so on. And these aren't just like dictionary definitions. They are foundational concepts.
Yeah.
You have to grasp these and accept them as true, really, before you can even move on.
Then come the axioms. Axioms. Stuff considered self-evidently true. And sometimes postulates, too, post.
Right. And from those basic building blocks, he just starts building his entire system. He states propositions prop, statements he's going to prove.
And each proposition gets a demonstration, a dem, which uses only what's already been established, definitions, axioms, previous propositions to logically prove the current one.
Exactly. Pure deduction. And if a proposition leads directly to other conclusions, he adds corollaries. Core.
And then there are the scholias. These are crucial, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. They're often where you get the most insight into his thinking. They're more like paragraphs of explanation. He'll give examples, anticipate objections, offer commentary. It's often his most, accessible writing.
And like in Euclid, when he finishes a proof, a demonstration, you often see that little QED, quarter at demonstrandum.
What was to be demonstrated?
Yeah.
It's like a stamp saying done, proven, certain.
So the really fascinating question is why? Why this incredibly rigorous mathematical method for philosophy?
Well, his main goal was certainty, clarity. He looked at traditional philosophy and saw endless disputes, uncertainty. He thought it lacked rigor. He wanted to build a system where the conclusions were as undeniable as, the Pythagorean theorem.
It's a massive challenge to how philosophy and theology were usually done back then, right? Relying on authority, Aristotle, the church, scripture.
Absolutely. You see this really clearly in his letters, especially with someone like Willem von Bleisenberg. Bleisenberg was a rationalist too, but he still believed that if reason led you to an idea that conflicted with Scripture, well, you had to doubt reason. Scripture trumped reason.
Spinoza, completely the opposite.
Totally. He basically says, I acquiesce completely to whatever my understanding shows me. If an idea is clear and distinct, perceived by reason without any confusion, then for Spinoza, it simply must be true.
He even gets rid of that Cartesian idea of a separate intellect and will, doesn't he? Says they're one and the same thing.
Exactly. Accepting a clear idea isn't some voluntary choice you make. It's just what happens when you have the idea. It's necessary. He calls it an act of a spiritual automaton, a necessary mental process, not a choice.
And he told Bleisenberg, look, even if following my clear ideas sometimes leads me into error, that's less important than the certainty and, interestingly, the joy I get from the process itself. He wanted to live in peace, joy, and cheerfulness, not sorrow, and he found that in understanding.
So the ethics isn't just presenting ideas, it's demanding you follow a rigorous deduction. It starts with these definitions and axioms like defining substance as existing in itself, or God as having infinite attributes, and he expects you to see these clearly and accept them as the starting points.
And that structure absolutely forces you to read it in a certain way. You have to follow the chain. Later propositions, like the famous one, whatsoever is in God, and without God, nothing can be or be conceived. Yeah, Prop Act 15. It's proven using definitions and propositions that came way earlier, like God's necessary existence from Prop Act 14, and the definitions and substance and modes.
It's totally cumulative. You can't just dip into part 3 and expect to get it. You need the foundation from parts 1 and 2. And the structure itself reinforces his core belief. Philosophical truth comes from reason's deductions, not from authority, not from faith, not from fuzzy imagination.
Which he explicitly contrasts with clear ideas, right? Imagination gives confused knowledge.
Right. Leads to error. So this rigorous method leads us straight into part 1. On God. And buckle up, because Spinoza's concept of God is, well, it's revolutionary. Prepare for something very different.
Okay, God, where does he start?
He defines God as the one single infinite self-caused substance. Full stop. Unlike everything else, we see tables, trees, us, which depend on other things for their existence.
Like the wood for the table, the carpenter.
Exactly. Substance depends on nothing else. It exists in itself. It's conceived through itself.
And he argues, with geometric rigor, that such a substance must exist, necessarily, and there can only be one such substance.
And that one substance is God.
Okay, one substance, God. What else?
He defines this God as absolutely infinite, meaning it possesses not just many attributes, but infinite attributes, each one expressing an eternal, infinite essence.
Infinite attributes. Wow. And this leads to another huge claim, right?
Yeah.
Proposition 16.
Yeah, Proposition 16. From the necessity of the divine nature must follow an infinite number of things in infinite ways. Basically, everything that exists, everything that can exist, flows necessarily automatically from the infinite nature of this one substance, God.
Like logical consequences.
Precisely. There's no external choice involved. Finite things, he adds later, follow from God's attributes as they are modified by finite modes, which are determined by other finite modes, and so on, infinitely. It's all one interconnected causal chain.
And as humans, we can only grasp two of these infinite attributes.
That's right. Thought and extension, which, interestingly, are the same fundamental concepts Descartes used for his two separate substances, mind and body.
But Spinoza completely rethinks them.
Radically. They're not separate substances. They're just two attributes of the one substance, God.
Which brings us to maybe his most famous idea, God or nature. Deus ex natura.
Exactly. For Spinoza, God isn't separate from nature. God isn't some transcendent creator figure sitting outside the universe pulling strings. God is nature, understood in its totality, its fundamental essence, its eternal laws.
So there's nothing outside God or nature.
Absolutely nothing. God or nature just is. Everything else, stars, rocks, thoughts, people, exists in God or nature as a part of it, as a mode of that one substance.
Which is just worlds away from most traditional ideas of God.
Completely. Spinoza's God has no psychology, no will, no human-like understanding, no emotions, no love, no anger, no plans, no judgments, no moral character in our sense.
One source puts it bluntly. His God is neither good nor wise nor just, in the way we usually mean those words.
Right. God acts only from the necessity of its own nature, which is the fabric of reality. It's neutral, unchanging, like a law of nature, like gravity. It doesn't interfere because everything is this necessary unfolding.
And you can see why people immediately yelled atheist.
Oh, absolutely. He wasn't denying God's existence. He was redefining it entirely. But for many, a God without personality, without will, was effectively no God at all. And sadly, Spinozism became this label for, godless materialism, which wasn't actually his position at all. His God is the entirety of being.
So within this one substance, God or nature, we have attributes and modes. Let's clarify those.
Okay. Attributes, as we said, are what our intellect perceives as making up the very essence of substance, like thought and extension. They are conceived through themselves. You understand them independently.
But how can one substance have multiple attributes that seem so different, like thinking and physical extension?
Good question. Spinoza argues that even though we conceive them distinctly, they're just different ways of expressing the same underlying reality of the substance. He says the more reality your being something has, the more attributes it possesses. So God, being absolutely infinite, must have infinite attributes.
Okay. And modes?
Modes are the affections or qualities of substance. They exist in substance. They depend on substance. Unlike attributes, modes are conceived through substance, through its attributes. They're caused by the attribute they modify.
So examples would be individual things, like this microphone or my thoughts.
Exactly. Individual physical things, like the microphone, are modes of extension. Individual minds or thoughts are modes of thought.
Right. So the one substance, God, and all the modes, finite things and ideas, that's everything, the sum total of existence.
That's it, which leads back to that powerful prop. So some does this guy, whatsoever is in God. And without God, nothing can be or be conceived. There's literally nowhere else for anything to be.
And this whole picture, one substance, infinite attributes, finite modes, it just completely demolishes Cartesian dualism, doesn't it? The idea of mind and body being two fundamentally different kinds of stuff.
Utterly rejects it. For Spinoza, they aren't different substances. They're just different ways, different attributes through which we grasp the one substance, God or nature.
Which sets us up perfectly for part 2, on the nature and origin of the mind. How does the mind relate to the body if they're not separate?
Yeah, they seem so different, don't they? My thoughts feel nothing like my arm.
Right.
Spinoza's answer is radical. Mind and body are not two distinct things interacting. They are, quote, one and the same thing, which is conceived sometimes under the attribute of thought and sometimes under the attribute of extension.
Okay, one and the same thing, just conceived differently. That's his psychophysical parallelism.
Exactly. Psychophysical parallelism. Modes of thought, ideas, and modes of extension, bodies, physical states, correspond perfectly, one-to-one. The order and connection of things, he says, is the same, whether you view it through thought or extension. For every idea, there's a corresponding physical state, and vice versa.
But, and this is crucial, there's no direct causation between them. My thoughts don't literally make my arm move.
Correct. No direct causal interaction across attributes. Mental events only cause other mental events. Physical events only cause other physical events. They run in parallel, perfectly synchronized, like two perfectly accurate clocks that don't affect each other.
Our sources pointed out how his proofs often jump between parts, referencing propositions about extension when talking about thought and vice versa, reinforcing this parallel structure.
Yes, and he states it explicitly. The order of our body's actions and passions is simultaneous in nature with the order of the actions and passions of the mind. Simultaneous, parallel, but not causally interacting across the divide.
This just flies in the face of our everyday experience, or what we think is our experience, that feeling that I decide to lift my arm and my arm lifts.
He tackles that head on. He says that conviction comes from ignorance, basically. We think the mind is in charge because we don't actually know the full extent of what the body can do just by its own physical laws.
He uses examples like animals, sleepwalking.
Exactly. Look at the incredibly complex things animals do without, presumably, conscious mental commands.
Yeah.
Or sleepwalkers navigating rooms. He suggests the body, purely through the laws of extension, can achieve things that seem miraculous to the mind that thinks it's the sole director. The body has its own power, its own determination.
So if the mind isn't the puppet master we think it is, what is it?
Fundamentally, Spinoza says the mind is the idea of the body. Our consciousness is the idea corresponding to our physical organism and how it's being affected by the world.
And our knowledge then comes from the ideas of these affections of the body, the changes it undergoes.
Precisely. When our body interacts with other bodies, say light from an object hitting our eyes, our body is modified, affected. The mind is the idea of that modification. That's the origin of our knowledge.
And he distinguishes different kinds of knowledge or ideas, doesn't he? Starting with the less reliable kind.
Yes, the first kind is what he calls inadequate, confused, or mutilated ideas. This is the realm of imagination. These ideas come directly from how external things affect our senses.
Like seeing the sun as small.
Perfect example. That idea tells you more about the state of your eye and how it's affected by sunlight than it tells you about the true nature of the sun itself. It's inadequate. This kind of knowledge is the source of error.
And it's why we tend to see things as contingent, as accidental rather than necessary.
Exactly. Because we're just registering effects without understanding the full causal chain.
Okay, so what are the better kinds of knowledge?
The second and third kinds, reason and intuition. These give us adequate, clear, and distinct ideas. They grasp the essence or the cause of things, not just the surface effects.
Reason deals with common notions, general properties.
Yes, understanding things through universal principles and logical deduction. Intuition is a higher form, a direct grasp of the essence of individual things and how they fit into the whole system.
And these adequate ideas, they're inherently true.
For Spinoza, yes. If you have a truly adequate idea, you perceive it clearly and distinctly, and you know it's true. There's no room for doubt. It's self-validating.
And this links back to God again, doesn't it? Our true thoughts are part of God's thoughts.
In a profound way, he says, our mind, insofar as it perceives things truly, is part of the infinite intellect of God. When we think clearly and adequately, our mind is participating in the eternal, necessary thought of God or nature.
But we're limited. We don't have adequate knowledge of everything, especially our own bodies.
Right. We only know our body through its affections, how it's changed by interactions. We don't have a complete, adequate idea of all its intricate parts and processes.
So as long as we're operating mainly on sensory input and imagination, the common order of nature affecting us, our knowledge of ourselves, our bodies, and the world is mostly confused and inadequate.
That's the human condition, according to Spinoza. We start from that state of confused knowledge.
Which leads us directly into part 3, on the origin and nature of the emotions, or affects, as he often calls them.
Yes, affectus.
Yeah.
And again, his approach is striking. He doesn't primarily judge emotions as good or bad, virtuous or sinful. He treats them as natural phenomena, like storms or tides.
Things to be understood, not just condemned.
Exactly. He wants to understand their causes and their nature according to necessary laws. Because he believes understanding them is the first step towards gaining some power over them, being less passively driven by them.
He distinguishes between passions and actions, right?
Yes. Affects can be passive states, passions where we are acted on. These are caused at least partly by external things and arise from inadequate ideas. Or they can be actions, where we are the adequate cause arising from adequate ideas.
And he boils all the complex emotions down to just 3 primary ones.
3 primaries: desire, pleasure, and pain. He argues that every other emotion, love, hate, hope, fear, envy, pride, pity, all of them are just variations or combinations of these 3 basic effects.
Okay, let's define those. Desire.
Desire is appetite plus the consciousness of it. But more deeply, it is our very essence, our nature, insofar as we are determined to act in ways that preserve our being. It's the fundamental drive.
Pleasure or joy, Letitia.
Pleasure is a passion, a passive state, where the mind transitions to a state of greater perfection. It signifies an increase in our power of acting, our power of thinking.
And pain or sadness, tristitia, is the opposite.
The opposite, a passive state where the mind transitions to a lesser perfection, a decrease in our power. He also mentions related terms like merriment or melancholy, depending on whether the whole body, mind, or just a part is affected.
And underpinning all of this is the concept of knatus.
Ah, yes, knatus, absolutely fundamental. Proposition 6 of part 3. Every single thing endeavors as far as it lies in itself to persevere in its own being. This is the inherent striving, the core tendency of everything finite to maintain its existence.
Whether it's a rock resisting erosion or us trying to stay alive.
Exactly. And Spinoza makes a crucial link. This striving, this knatus, is the actual essence of the thing.
But desire is the knatus.
Desire is the knatus, considered in relation to both mind and body. And pleasure and pain are the feelings that accompany an increase or decrease in the power of this knatus, usually due to external causes.
So our actions, motivations, emotions, they all stem from this basic drive to persist.
That's the foundation. And understanding this, understanding the causal chains, how specific situations interacting with our knatus produce specific emotions, that's the key to control.
How so?
Well, remember, actions come from adequate ideas, passions from inadequate ones. When we are dominated by passions, we have inadequate ideas were being acted upon by external things we don't fully understand.
But if we gain clear, adequate knowledge of an emotion,
If we understand its true cause and nature, we form an adequate idea of it. This allows us, Spinoza says, to separate the emotion from the confused thought of its external cause and connect it instead to true, rational thoughts.
does this destroy the emotion?
It transforms it. It can neutralize or destroy passive emotions like irrational hatred or confused love that are based on misunderstandings. And it helps us regulate our appetites, preventing them from becoming excessive. The underlying striving is still there, but it's now guided by understanding, by adequate ideas rather than confused ones.
He gave that example of ambition versus piety, right? Same underlying desire, but one comes from inadequate ideas, passion, the other from adequate ideas, action, virtue.
Exactly. The quality of the idea determines the quality of the affect. Understanding transforms passion into action.
Which leads us right into part 4, on human bondage or the strength of the emotions. What does he mean by bondage?
Bondage is precisely this state, being primarily acted on by external causes, being subject to passive emotions, being driven by inadequate ideas. In this state, we aren't the true, adequate cause of what we do or feel. We're determined by forces outside our rational understanding.
And he has that rather stark axiom in part 4 about human power being limited.
Oh yes. There is no singular thing in nature than which there is not another more powerful and stronger. The power of man is infinitely surpassed by the power of external causes. It emphasizes our vulnerability as finite modes within this vast, powerful system. That's the context for our bondage.
And this is where he tackles freedom, which for Spinoza is not what most people think it is, not free will.
Definitely not free will in the sense of being able to choose otherwise in a given situation. He flatly denies any absolute faculty of willing and not willing. He says our choices are necessarily determined by the ideas and effects we have at that moment. There's no separate will making an undetermined choice.
So what is freedom then?
True freedom, for Spinoza, is acting from your own nature, specifically your rational nature. It's acting from knowledge, from adequate ideas. It's understanding the necessary causes of things, including your own actions and emotions.
So freedom isn't opposed to necessity.
Quite the opposite. Freedom is the recognition and affirmation of necessity. As one source put it, the more we understand necessity, the more active we become, and the more active we become, the more we express our freedom. To be free is to understand why you necessarily act as you do, to see it flowing from the rational order of things rather than feeling pushed around by unknown forces.
Understanding necessity liberates you from being merely subject to it blindly.
Precisely. And this ascent, from inadequate ideas and passion to adequate ideas and action, leads to the highest state in Spinoza's system, the intellectual love of God, amor intellectualis Dei.
Which comes from the highest kind of knowledge, intuition.
Yes, the third kind of knowledge. Intuition allows us to grasp things directly, see their essence, and understand how they follow necessarily from God's nature, seeing things sub specie eternitatis, under the aspect of eternity outside of time.
So what is this intellectual love?
It's defined as pleasure, the joy or mental acquiescence that comes from understanding, accompanied by the idea of God as the eternal cause. It's a love directed towards God, understood as the eternal, necessary reality of nature. This understanding, this love, comes to be the dominant force in the mind.
But it's not an emotional relationship like loving a person?
Absolutely not.
Nah.
Remember, Spinoza's God has no emotions, no passions. God is eternally perfect, cannot increase or decrease in perfection. So this isn't about feeling an emotion towards God. It's an intellectual state, a joyful, affirmative understanding and embrace of the eternal necessity of God or nature itself.
And this is blessedness, happiness.
Yes. Blessedness, the ultimate goal, consists in the mind achieving this perfection, this highest understanding, and the intellectual love that flows from it.
Which brings us to the final part, part 5, on the power of the understanding or of human freedom. How do we get there?
This part really lays out the path. It elaborates on how, through reason, through cultivating adequate ideas, we can transform those passive emotions, the passions that enslave us, into active ones. We move from being acted upon to acting.
Because virtue, genuine action, comes from adequate ideas.
Right. The mind rejoices insofar as it acts, meaning insofar as it understands adequately.
Yeah.
Even desire is transformed when it stems from rational understanding.
So liberation is this shift from confused, inadequate ideas, imagination, passion, to clear, adequate ideas, reason, intuition.
That's the core process, moving up through the kinds of knowledge we talked about from part 2.
And the more we understand our emotions, seeing their necessary causes, the less we're just passively subjected to them.
Exactly. We gain the power to manage them, to order them according to our rational understanding. We gain control, not by suppressing them, but by understanding them.
Understanding necessity changes everything, even things like pity.
Yes. If you truly understand why something necessarily happened, Spinoza argues, you won't find anything deserving of hatred, ridicule, or even pity in the passive sense. Pity arises from seeing misfortune and feeling passive sadness. Understanding the necessity removes the basis for that passive reaction. Reason, he says, actually requires us not to be passively touched by pity.
So the ultimate goal is this blessedness, this happiness achieved through understanding and the intellectual love of God.
Yes. And this isn't some reward you get after being virtuous. It is virtue itself. It's the highest state of human functioning. And it's something potentially available to everyone, common to all, because it's based on reason.
To act virtuously is to act according to reason, to strive to understand God or nature.
Right. And the person who lives by reason, understanding necessity, acting well, being joyful, that person is actually the most beneficial person to others. Man is to man a God, as the saying goes, when guided by reason. Understanding fosters connection, not isolation.
Okay, but there's that tricky bit at the end of Part V about something of the mind being eternal. That seems hard to square with the mind just being the idea of the body which perishes.
Ah, yes, VP 23. It's definitely one of the most debated parts of Spinoza.
How does he argue it?
It's complex. The basic idea is that within God, within the eternal substance, there necessarily exists the eternal idea or concept expressing the essence of your particular body. Since the mind is the idea of the body, this eternal idea of the body's essence pertains to the essence of your mind. And because it exists in God, who is eternal, this essential idea is also eternal.
So it's not my personal consciousness or memories surviving death.
No, not personal immortality in the usual sense. It's the eternity of the rational essence of your mind, the part that grasps eternal truth through adequate ideas as it exists timelessly within the necessary structure of God nature.
It's the part of us that connects with the eternal order.
That seems to be the idea. But exactly how it fits with the strict parallelism and the mind being the idea of the existing body, well, scholars still wrestle with that. It's tough.
Okay. As we wrap up this deep dive, let's think about Spinoza's legacy, the impact, the controversies.
Well, the ethics is just monumental, unique. The geometric method, while not widely copied, set a new standard for rigor. And the sheer scope of his systematic vision, God as nature, the single substance, parallelism, emotions as natural, freedom as necessity, it just challenged everything.
He dissolves so many traditional splits, doesn't he? Mind, body, reason, emotion, freedom, necessity, God, world.
Yeah, he replaces those dichotomies with this spectrum of passivity versus activity, being acted upon versus acting from understanding. Our whole ethical life plays out on that spectrum.
And influence.
Huge, though sometimes indirect. German idealists like Hegel were deeply engaged with him. And as we mentioned, aspects resonate even today, like in cognitive science, looking at emotion and embodiment, with people like Damasio finding insights there, even if they take the ideas out of the full metaphysical context.
And we shouldn't forget the theological political treatise. His arguments there for democracy, free speech, secular government, biblical criticism, they were radical and hugely influential too.
Absolutely. And that book caused an immediate firestorm, even more than the whispers about his metaphysics. It really confirmed the fears of religious and political authorities.
Which links back to his excommunication, the harem, when he was only 23, and the banning of his works.
Yes, the TTP, published anonymously, just fueled the fire. And our sources mention his genuine fear for his safety afterwards. He saw what happened to his friend Korbag, who died in prison for similar ideas. He saw the political climate change with the murder of the DeWitt brothers, who'd offered some protection.
Which is partly why he didn't publish the ethics in his lifetime.
Seems very likely he knew the risks. And as we said, Spinozism became this bogeyman term, often misrepresenting him as a simple atheist or materialist, which just wasn't accurate to his complex view of God as the sole substance.
So despite the difficulty, the controversy, the demands it makes, the ethics keeps asking these huge questions, doesn't it? About God, reality, mind, body, emotion, reason, freedom, the good life.
Absolutely. His completely integrated vision, metaphysics, knowledge, psychology, ethics, all locked together, offers this incredibly powerful, though definitely challenging way to see the world and our place in it, within that vast necessary order of God or nature.
So we've journeyed through his geometric universe, from the method itself to God as nature, the mind-body parallel, emotions rooted in striving, human bondage to passion, and the path to freedom through understanding and that intellectual love of God.
Yeah, key things to hold on to. The unity of everything in one substance,
Yeah.
that fundamental striving, the kinatas, the power of understanding to shift us from passive suffering to active joy, and that really radical idea linking freedom directly to understanding and accepting necessity.
It's not easy grappling with Spinoza. It forces you to question basic assumptions about free will, God, emotions, what it even means to be human. But the payoff is this vision of profound integration, maybe even a path to a different kind of peace.
Which leads to that final thought, really. If Spinoza's right, if everything happens out of absolute necessity according to the eternal laws of God or nature, can we really truly lament anything? Does it make sense to rage against what happens?
Or does understanding that necessity, really grasping it, lead us, as he suggests, to the highest possible peace, joy, and cheerfulness? Does it free us from being tossed about by things we don't understand? What do you think, listening to all this? Where does it leave you?